SEP Fanfic Readings presents Aurelian by Biddy Blue Eyes. Chapter 10. Tears, Explanations, and Laughter. Hermione? Harry called uncertainly when he heard a small sob from the kitchen. He glanced at Malfoy and stood up. Hermione? He called again as he entered the kitchen and slowly walked over to the table. You all right? Hermione nodded and stifled another small sob. Yeah, it's just too much. Yeah, Harry agreed sadly. Harry, I'm so sorry. Hermione's outburst took Harry completely by surprise. For what? It was my fault. Twice. Twice I could have killed her, and I didn't, she cried wretchedly. You, Luna, Fred, Malfoy, you wouldn't have died if it weren't for me. Draco looked up when he overheard Hermione speak and listened closely to the rest of the conversation. Hermione, that's ridiculous, Harry said in disbelief. It wasn't her fault. She did everything she could. I'm sure I would have made all of the same decisions myself. She didn't do anything wrong. Nothing was her fault, and even less your fault. You had nothing to do with any of it. She's me, Harry, she reminded him. Yes, she's you, but you're not her. You didn't make any of those decisions. And even if you did, there were no bad decisions. So stop, Harry insisted. You can't take credit for any of that. But if you're going to try and take credit for anything, then take credit for saving everyone. It was her that sent Aurelian back here. It's because of that decision that none of those people are going to have to die at all. Hermione nodded while trying to restrain her tears. No, don't just nod. I want you to really believe it, Harry pressed. Hermione nodded again. I know. You're right. I'm sorry. You can go back in the living room. I'll get the tea. You just sit down for a minute, offered Harry. No, it's fine. I can... Sit, Harry commanded. Hermione snorted a small chuckle and obediently stayed sitting while Harry moved about the kitchen. Harry had grown so much over the years, and it never failed to surprise her. When she looked at him, she could still remember the small 11-year-old boy with a bit of an attitude, a streak of defiance, and a thirst to prove himself. That boy was now 20 years old and had become a steady and patient leader. Well, not always patient, but he had improved on that a lot. He no longer felt the need to prove himself, and his streak of defiance had morphed into a desperate desire to pursue justice. He was just strong and commanding in a way that people truly respected. Sugar, sugar, Harry chanted as he spun around looking for the sugar bowl. Hermione stood up and walked to the counter behind him. She reached past his arm and placed the sugar bowl on the tray. You set it down near the toaster. I knew that, he joked. Hermione smiled softly and walked with Harry back into the living room. Sorry about that, Hermione apologized to Malfoy. No, it's all right, he replied. Hermione looked at him curiously. She had expected him to either say something cocky or derisive, or say nothing, but he hadn't said a single cutting thing the entire day. Well, with the exception of being uptight with her earlier in the day about not being able to see Aurelian. She quickly pushed the thought aside. She had enough to think about without adding that to it. So, where do we start? Harry asked. Pansy, Draco answered. If we're right in thinking that she was killed and it was her blood on my wall when I was attacked, then she was the first known victim in this whole thing. Hermione and Harry were rather surprised that Malfoy spoke up so quickly. They hadn't expected him to participate as easily as he had. I agree, said Harry. She's where we should start, as she was the first victim, and the attack that occurred in the future really isn't that far away. We need to find out why she was targeted and make sure we can prevent the attack. I think, said Hermione, that it might be her parents that are actually the targets. I mean, I have a feeling that Pansy might have been killed because of them. Or, Hermione looked at Draco curiously, how close are you to Pansy? We've been friends since we were small, Draco answered. We're still good friends, but we really don't see each other as often as we used to. Why? You don't think that anyone would hurt her thinking it could be to punish you? Hermione asked. No, Draco replied rather confidently. If they tried to punish me by hurting someone close to me, then they'd choose my mother, or Zabini. I think you're right that it would probably be to punish Pansy's parents. Yes, especially considering that they're still targeted after Pansy has gone missing, Hermione reasoned. Are you close enough to Pansy that you could have a chat with her? Harry asked. Yeah, Draco nodded. I was thinking that I could ask her to join me for dinner. We could do some catching up, and I could try to figure out what's happening. Good, Harry said, lost in his thoughts. But you have to be careful when talking to her. You can't mention anything about, I know it's confidential, Potter. And I'm skilled at casually addressing topics to gather information, Draco assured him. Good, Harry repeated. Okay, so Malfoy will talk with Pansy. What's next? Hermione asked. Dennis, Harry answered. Hermione nodded as it was her thought exactly. He was the next target. Well, his parents were killed, so we must assume that it was him that they were targeting for punishment, since his parents are muggles and wouldn't otherwise be connected to the wizarding world. But what for? What would they want with Dennis? I don't know, Hermione said seriously. He seems like such a random target. I mean, not that the Parkinsons were ever involved with Death Eaters, but, well, as a prominent pureblood family, they're much more likely to be targeted. Dennis personally has nothing to do with the war. Which means that we might have somehow happened upon their recent business, Harry suggested. I think he's definitely the next step. We go and talk to him. We find out how he's been and what he's up to. Tomorrow, even. I don't like how little time we have until their big first move. The attack on Malfoy and Pansy. We have to get on this quickly. So, tomorrow morning, skipping the office once again, we visit the Creevy house. Unannounced? Draco inquired. Yes, Harry said. If something has happened already, he may be apprehensive to speak about it. He never comes to us in the future. He could feel threatened and try to come up with things to hide the truth. He's a good kid, but people don't always have the best judgment when they're scared. In my job, it's best to come unannounced. Draco nodded in understanding. Will you be joining us? Harry asked him. You mean you're giving me a choice? Draco asked. Don't I always? Harry replied. You're in this voluntarily. So long as you want to be involved, you're privy to all parts of this investigation. You have very little obligation at this point. The choice of how involved you want to be is completely up to you. Draco looked away from the two that looked at him in question. It made him uncomfortable when Potter did that to him. It wasn't the first time either. He was open about what choices were, and instead of just letting Draco go along with things, gently pressuring him to give a concrete answer. I already told you that I'd be part of this, he said with a hint of irritation. This is as serious for me as it is for you. I won't be left out. Good. Thank you, Harry responded. We really do appreciate it. Draco's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't know what to make of Potter. They had quite the history of filled with deep animosity that bordered on utter hatred, but somehow, during the war, they had felt pity for each other's roles. For the first time, they had seen each other as just another person suffering. When the war ended, Draco had been frightened of the fate that awaited him. He had pleaded for people to understand that he hadn't wanted to do those things. He was surprised as much as anyone when Potter had helped him and given him the chance to make amends. Potter hadn't seemed pleased to extend the invitation, and things were tense between them. But he'd never been unkind. 2 years later, not only was Potter not unkind, but he acted like he truly wanted to put everything behind him. Malfoy didn't want to dwell on the past, but he wasn't sure what to make of the man that really didn't feel comfortable with the idea of building anything that resembled a friendship. It felt odd just to be civil, but civility certainly felt more comfortable than baseless anger. They just had to get used to one another. So, tomorrow morning at 9, Harry said finally. Do you mind if we meet here again, Hermione? Just before we leave? No, that's fine. Much easier than messing around with the wards at your place, Hermione smiled. I'll work it out soon, though, he said to Malfoy, who was a bit confused as to why this was directed at him. He quickly realized that, though Potter must have some serious wards up considering what a large target he was, he would probably take a bit of work to find a way to let a new person in. And on the same note, we have to take into consideration that we may have to bring the Order of Phoenix in on this at some point. If it looks like we're not making enough progress, we'll need help. The Weasleys will be the first to know, and it might not be long before we discuss some things to them that they already know about Aurelian. You mentioned Weasley, or, Ron, Draco said uncomfortably. Have you told him about everything? Yes, Harry replied. Ron is a part of this investigation, just not directly. We don't want to draw too much attention to this, and asking Ron to join in the investigation would have both our superiors asking too many questions. Not to mention, it's nice to have someone looking a small crime. I'm sure we'll appreciate him there. He will be filled in on everything, though. In fact, I plan to go back there when we finished here. So, we have a start now, said Hermione. Malfoy speaks to Pansy, and we go speak with Dennis Creevy. Now, I don't doubt your ability to speak with Parkinson, but I want to remind you that every detail is important. You'll have to be sure to remember everything the best you can and give us everything you've got, Harry told Draco. Draco nodded. Regarding that, should we ever feel that we might be missing anything, if we ever feel a tiny detail might have been overlooked, McGonagall said that she doesn't actually need the pensive right now, and we can borrow it for as long as we need, Hermione informed them. That's perfect, said Harry. So, is there anything else we need to address? Hermione asked. There's plenty needed to be addressed, but we take it one step at a time, Harry answered. Yes, but there is still one thing I need to know, Draco spoke up. What is a horcrux? Harry and Hermione exchanged a look that made Draco feel uneasy. They didn't look like they meant to hide it, but they both looked disquieted simply by its mention, and they looked uncertain about how to approach it. It's dark magic. The darkest magic, Hermione started quietly. See, when a person commits a murder, it's not only a sin against man, it's a sin against nature. It's unnatural. Committing murder damages the soul. It actually rips the soul. There are some dark wizards, very, very few throughout history, as it is so frightening to consider, who take advantage of that damage done to their soul, and instead of just accepting the damage that is done, they force the soul to sever completely in half. They then take half of their soul and store it outside of their body. This way, if they're ever killed and that part of their soul is destroyed, half of their soul still survives. The thing that contains a piece of their soul is called the horcrux. And what is this thing? What is it that they hide their souls inside? Draco asked. He could tell by the way people had talked about it in his memory that it was a way to keep them from dying, but he'd never imagined how it would be possible once the body was destroyed. It was disconcerting, to say the least. Anything, Harry said simply. It can be anything. And the Dark Lord... Voldemort had one? He probed. No, Harry answered with a hint of annoyance that Malfoy realized was not aimed at himself. Voldemort had 7. What? Draco startled in disbelief. He split his soul into 7? No, he split his soul in half 7 times, Harry corrected. He didn't just split his soul, he completely mutilated it, Hermione added in disgust. He was hardly human when he was destroyed. So you had to destroy his horcruxes before you could destroy him. What were they? How did you find them? The entire idea had Draco feeling a bit angry. Well, a horcrux can be made of just about anything, but Voldemort seemed to prefer treasured items. Not many who would go to such lengths would want to stick something as precious as their soul in something like a tin can. Voldemort, or Tom Riddle, didn't have much of the orphanage when he was a child and started the habit of taking trophies for things he felt accomplished with, like a good use of magic or cunning, Harry explained. Wait, what? An orphanage? Draco asked in confusion. Yeah, Hermione replied. Despite how serious he was about pureblood supremacy, he was a half-blood himself. He was the heir of Slytherin and quite proud of it, but his father was a muggle, something he never really shared with people. Anyway, Harry continued, he chose things that he considered great treasures and hid them in places of significance to him. The first one was a diary that he created in 7th year at school. He killed Moaning Myrtle and locked part of his soul in the diary. A special diary. It's a long story. But Ginny had the diary, and it possessed her. I destroyed that horcrux in the Chamber of Secrets before we had any idea what it was. Dumbledore recognized it as something truly dark, though, and began looking into it. He gathered many memories that people had of Tom Riddle. It was in a memory of Slughorn's that we realized that he planned to make 7. There was also a ring that was passed down through his family. Dumbledore destroyed that one himself just before we started our 6th year. That is what cursed him and turned his hand black. There was the Slytherin locket. That one has a very long story. It took us months, and it was the reason we broke into the Ministry of Magic. There was Hufflepuff's silver cup. That was in Bellatrix's vault in Gringotts. And there was Ravenclaw's diadem in the Room of Requirement. That's what we were after during the start of the battle. Horcruxes are difficult to destroy. There are very few things that can destroy them. Hermione continued the story. We used basilisk venom for all of them. Most of the time we used the Sword of Gryffindor because it was imbued with basilisk venom from when Harry destroyed the basilisk. The diadem, though, it was destroyed by fiendfire. But that's only 5. What about the other 2 horcruxes? Draco asked seriously. The last 2 were challenging in different ways, Hermione said hesitantly. His snake, Nagini, was the last horcrux. It was sort of a last-minute emergency horcrux, I suppose. At the end, he didn't let the snake out of his sight. It was Neville that defeated it. You're still missing one. You said the snake was the last, but what was the 6th? Draco demanded. He felt flustered that they hid something from him. Hermione looked at Harry empathetically, but he just appeared a bit exasperated. Me, he answered. Draco looked utterly confused. It was an accident. He didn't mean for it to happen, and he never even knew it, Harry said with a mirthless smirk. At Draco's confusion, Hermione continued for Harry. When Voldemort tried to kill Harry as a baby, he failed because of the protection Harry had gained when his mother sacrificed herself to try to save him. When he failed, the spell sort of backfired. Because Voldemort's soul was so small and weak and mutilated, the rebounding spell happened to split his soul again. Half of his remaining soul fled, unable to return to its body. The other half was forced into Harry. But how can you still be alive and have destroyed the Horcrux? Draco inquired as he stared at Harry suspiciously. Well, now that's the complicated part. Harry seemed doleful, but still somewhat amused by it. When I learned I was the Horcrux, I was resigned that I was going to have to take one for the team. When he called me out, I went. I went without a fight, and he cast the killing curse on me. But that's where the weird part of the Elder Wand comes in. It was because you disarmed Dumbledore. I stole your wand, and Voldemort stole Dumbledore's wand, that Voldemort's new wand would not work against me. But it could still work against him. When he cast the killing curse, it destroyed the piece of his soul inside me, but I survived. Still, I wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for your mother. What? Draco was already reeling with the new information, but it was Harry's confession regarding his mother that threw him the most. Harry wore a small, lopsided smile. I had a feeling that she wouldn't have told you about that. I'm not really sure why. I tell you this not to bring up sore pieces of the past, because I really have forgiven it. But it's partly because of your mother that you were not in Azkaban right now. When I was hit with the killing curse, I feigned death. Voldemort asked your mother if I was dead, and she lied to his face. She did it for you. She thought that if I could end it all, you'd be safe. I felt that I owed her after that. You stood up for me because of her, Draco asked bewilderedly. I said it was partly the reason, Harry corrected seriously. Someone also confronted me about where I stood on the matter. They said that I was being unfair, that I was being resentful and vindictive because of a childhood-boyhood rivalry. Harry glanced at Hermione out of the corner of his eye. They told me that people believed you were just one of the many who were threatened by Voldemort and acted out of fear. So I decided to give you a chance to prove yourself. And? Draco was somewhat affronted by the way Harry spoke of the events that he wished were fully behind him. He had to remind himself that he had just asked the man to give him these answers. And I don't regret it, Harry admitted. Draco was still upset about where the conversation had taken them, but he couldn't help but feel proud, and perhaps even a bit arrogant, that Potter could not dispute his decency or integrity. So how did you discover that you were a Horcrux? Draco asked in order to find a way back to their previous conversation. The pensive, actually. As most people know, Snape gave me some of his memories before he died, and one of them was a conversation he held with Dumbledore that explained that I would have to die to defeat Voldemort. It all made sense then. And you just accepted that? He asked in disgusted disbelief. What else could I have done? Harry reasoned. You could have told your friends, Hermione responded heatedly as she glared at him in contempt. Harry sighed with exasperation. Hermione, we've been through this. That doesn't mean I've accepted it. It doesn't mean I've forgiven it. After what we've just seen, I am as upset as ever. You did it again, she angrily reminded him. Hermione, Harry started in tired frustration. You did it again, Hermione repeated with greater force. You sacrificed yourself in order to try to defeat someone else. Do you have any idea how much that hurts? Hermione, that wasn't me. That hasn't happened. It won't happen, Harry argued. Maybe not like that, but I have seen that you are still like that. It might not happen like that, but it doesn't mean that something else might not happen where you act the same way. I don't want to keep losing you. You did the same thing, you know, Harry countered. In that pensive, you sacrificed yourself to send Aurelian back in hopes of saving everyone. I don't understand how you can be upset with someone over that. There is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends. Yeah, well, it's a lot easier to love your friends when they're alive, Hermione retorted. Harry sighed and looked away from her. He realized that it was an argument that she would never even try to see from his side. Well, that really depends on the friend now, doesn't it? Malfoy said with a small smirk. Hermione and Harry looked at him in surprise and confusion before what he said really got through to them. They looked at each other and grinned just before Hermione burst into giggles. Harry joined her laughter. You've got a point, he said to Malfoy. Harry chuckled again and looked over at Hermione, whose giggles seemed to have become more intense instead of fading as his had done. Her laughter was contagious, and he chuckled again as he watched her. Hermione covered her mouth with her hand, but her laughter just couldn't seem to stop. Geez, Granger, it wasn't supposed to be that funny, Draco smirked. I know, Hermione squealed through her high-pitched girlish giggling. She tried to slow down and took a few breaths so she could speak. I just can't stop. It's like it's all stacked up. She took another few breaths, but they were followed by more giggles. I can't stop. Harry and Draco exchanged amused looks, and both wore lopsided smiles as they watched Hermione try to gain control of herself. "Geez, did you slip or something, Potter?" Draco snickered. "Stop!" she pleaded as she wiped a tear from her eye. "Don't do that! Don't make me laugh! I'm trying to stop!" Harry chuckled silently again at his friend. She was usually so composed. It was funny to see her like that, but it felt really good, too. It was true that she didn't laugh enough, and he had hardly seen her smile at all the past couple days. Maybe it had been built up, and Draco's dry wit just happened to be the thing that set her off. "Okay, okay," Hermione said, blowing out slow breaths. Every few breaths a small tittering laugh would escape, but she really was settling down and getting back her control. "I'm sorry," she said, followed by another soft snorted laugh. "Okay, okay, I'm done." She took one last deep breath and blew it out slowly. Right, we've got to start for today. Malfoy's going to meet with Pansy. We're going to check in on Ron and see what else we can find pertaining to the Parkinsons and the Creevies and look at fugitive Death Eater files. And we meet here tomorrow at 9, right? After a pause, when neither boy answered, Hermione looked at them strangely. "What?" she asked hesitantly. "I'm just afraid if I say something, you'll start laughing again," Malfoy admitted. Harry looked at Malfoy and laughed a bit himself. He had been thinking the same thing, but he hadn't wanted to admit it, for he was certain she would laugh at that. And she did. Hermione rolled her eyes and let out another soft string of giggles. "Well, I probably would have been fine if you hadn't chosen to bring it up," though her giggling didn't continue. She still wore a painfully large smile, something that only 20 minutes before would have never thought she'd be capable of for quite a while. Chapter 11. Concern and Uncertainty. "Whoa, yeah," Ron said in a dejected gaze. He sat on the interrogation room table with his feet on his chair in front of him and his elbows on his knees. Harry and Hermione had relayed everything that they had seen in the Pensive earlier that day, and Ron was quite overwhelmed by it. Hermione and Harry both sighed. It was one of those most difficult things that they had ever had to witness, and it was difficult in a very different way to have to relive it as they spoke the details aloud. "You know," Ron said quietly, "at first I was pretty upset that I wasn't able to view the memories with you, but I'm really not that envious anymore." Harry nodded in agreement. He was glad he had information to help him discover a way to prevent it all from happening, but he rather wished he hadn't had to view those horrible events either. "So, Malfoy is going to speak to Pansy and see if she might tell him anything that might be going on with her family. And tomorrow, the three of us are going to try to talk to Dennis Creevey," Hermione informed him, glad to be done with the discussion for the events of the future war. "That's a good place to start," Ron agreed. "What about you?" Harry asked. "Were you able to have another look at the break-in at Snape's house?" "Yeah, I went there this morning," Ron affirmed. "There really wasn't anything there. The place was completely empty and everything looked untouched. There still weren't any traces of magic. The report said that the front door was splintered by the handle. It looked like a physically forced entry. I couldn't have a look at that, though, because the squad repaired it when they left. I talked to Susan about the evidence she collected. There was only a bit of mud, really. She identified that substance they found as just a tiny piece of strawberry taffy. From what I can tell, it really does look like it was just some muggle kids messing around." "While that's a relief, it also means we don't have any further leads at the moment," Harry said tiredly. "I'm not getting anywhere with this either," Hermione said. She sat back in her chair as she continued to scan another profile. "We know that Rabaston and Rodolphus Lestrange must be involved in this. They were never caught, and they were both very close to Bellatrix. If anyone knows about Bellatrix Horcrux, I'd be willing to bet just about anything that it's Rodolphus." "I'd say that's a pretty safe bet," Harry approved. "I'm surprised that she would tell anyone about it, though." "Perhaps she left information about it for him to find after she died," Ron offered. "That's a really good thought," Hermione said thoughtfully. "If she did, it could be very helpful to find that, if we knew where to look." "I think that about a lot of things could be answered if we found the Lestrange brothers," Harry grumbled with frustration. "No one has seen either of them in 2 years." "That's not necessarily true," Hermione argued. "Just because no one has reported seeing them doesn't mean that they haven't been seen. Some might be too afraid to report it. Some might not have recognized them, or they could have even used memory charms." "That still doesn't help us," Harry muttered. "No, it doesn't," Hermione agreed. "I keep looking through these files on all fugitive Death Eaters, and I don't know what I'm looking for. In your investigations after the war, Malfoy mentioned a man named Summers that no one had ever heard of, so I don't have a clue if he could be involved or not. Malfoy also mentioned a man named Burke from Slovenia. We were able to get some information on him, but weren't really able to look into it because of international prosecution laws. But with the mention of Slovenia and the Pensive, I have a feeling that if he's not already involved, he will be. Hermione closed the file in her hand and slapped it down on the large stack of files in front of her. Where do we start with all of this? Well, we start by investigating the Parkinsons and Dennis Creevy, and Ron keeps looking through the reports for anything that might possibly have had Death Eater involvement, Harry answered. Don't I get the fun job, Ron grumbled. Hey, we're here right now helping with it, so stop complaining, Hermione ordered. Now let's start by going over everything we know about Rodolphus. Well, Harry began, we know that at Hogwarts he was friends with Rossier, Lucius, and Bellatrix, and that— No, Harry, Hermione interrupted. Before that. We start from the beginning. Rodolphus was born in— Hermione stopped mid-speech when there was a smart rap on the door. Harry held a finger to Hermione to ask her to wait a moment so that he could drop the Muffliato charm. Come in. The door opened and a ginger head popped around the door. Ginny? Ron asked in surprise. What are you doing here? Ginny stepped the rest of the way into the room. She seemed a bit sheepish to be in their office in her dirty Quidditch robes. Is everything okay? Harry asked, concerned as to why she would turn up so suddenly. Though she often met with him for lunch, she rarely showed up at their office and almost never left the house without primping first. Well, yes, but no. Mom sent me. I guess Aurelian had a bit of an accident, Ginny said, bending to the side to see Hermione past Ron, who still sat at the table. What? Hermione cried as she got to her feet. He tripped and tumbled down a flight of stairs. He's all right. Mom said she'd have no problem patching him up, but she never really actually asked your permission to give him any potions or use any healing spells on him, and she doesn't want to overstep, Ginny explained. She just sent me to ask if you wanted her to heal him, or if— Is he okay? I mean, Merlin, Harry, I have to go. Go on, Hermione, Harry interrupted, and he saw the panic in her eyes. He's okay, Ginny shouted after Hermione. She sighed and her shoulders fell when Hermione apparated away on the small plinth in the center of the Auror's office. This is not what I meant to accomplish, she told Harry and Ron. I didn't want her to panic. She's a new mother, Ginny, Harry said with light amusement. Of course she'd panic over something like this. Yeah, I guess you're right. Well, I'll see you guys tonight, won't I? Ginny asked. I live there, Ginny, Ron reminded her. It was my way of asking if Harry was coming for dinner, Ginny told him. Yeah, Harry smiled. I'll be there. Ginny leaned in and gave Harry a light kiss on the lips before leaving after Hermione. Molly! Molly! Hermione called frantically as she entered the burrow. Mummy! A pathetic cry came from the kitchen. In here, dear, Molly called calmly. Hermione rushed into the kitchen. Aurelian, are you all right? She asked quickly as she placed a gentle hand on the back of the boy's head, where he sat atop the kitchen table. Is he all right? Yes, he's fine, Molly assured her. He just rushed out after his bath and took a little tumble down the stairs. I fall down the stairs, Mummy, Aurelian pouted, great tears still sliding down his rosy cheeks. You're okay, though, aren't you? Molly encouraged as she rubbed his back. He's only got a knot on his head and nibbled his lip there. He also said that he knocked his knee, but there's no obvious bruising. Molly gently dabbed a cloth on his bloody lip, and he quickly turned his head away and whimpered. Hermione softly lifted the hair from his forehead to have a look at the light blue bump above his left eye. Oh, Aurelian, she said miserably. It's okay. We'll have him patched up in no time. I could have done it myself, but I wasn't sure how you'd feel about that, Molly explained. I really didn't mean to worry you. No, it's okay. I was just concerned. And of course I don't mind if you treat him. I just had to come check on him myself, Hermione told her as she ran her fingers through the soft brown hair on the back of Aurelian's head. Of course, dear. I'm sorry he got hurt, and I didn't mean to worry you. We would have been okay either way. I know his lip looks bad, but it's really nothing. Mouth injuries usually look much worse than they actually are because they bleed more. I told Ginny to tell you it wasn't anything serious. And I did, said Ginny as she walked into the kitchen. I know, Hermione repeated. I was just worried. It's understandable, Molly assured her. It's what mothers do. Now you wait here and I'll go get the bruise ointment. It hurts, Mummy. It hurts right there, Aurelian cried and pointed at the bump on his head. I know, love, Hermione said. Did you put ice on it? Ice? Asked Ginny. Yeah, it takes the swelling down. It's what muggles do. When I was little and hurt my mouth, my parents used to give me an ice lolly. The cold would dull the pain and reduce the swelling, and being sweet treat, it used to take my mind off my injuries, Hermione reminisced. Of course, I guess ice isn't really needed in the wizarding world, as most things can be healed so easily. I used to have to walk around with a puffy lip and bruises for days. I think the ice lolly idea is brilliant, Ginny said with a shrug of her shoulders. It'd have to beat the paste Mum rubbed on us. I have ice lolly, Mummy? Aurelian asked, his fat lips still in a pout and his large gray eyes sparkling up at her. I'm sorry, love, but I don't have any, Hermione told him. Aunt Ginny do, Aurelian said. Ginny chuckled at this. I don't, actually, but I could make some really quickly. Just some juice in a mold and a quick freezing spell. Is that okay? She asked Hermione. Yeah, that's fine, Hermione consented. Okay, how about some orange juice with a bit of cranberry juice? Does that sound yummy? Ginny asked. Aurelian nodded and smiled for the first time since Hermione had arrived. All right, here we are, Molly smiled as she re-entered the kitchen with a tub of small ointment. This will rid those bumps in no time. Aurelian sat still, only wincing a few times, while Molly gently rubbed the ointment on the swollen tissue. He watched Ginny closely as she prepared the ice lollies. He started spitting with distaste when some of the ointment got on the inside of his lip. There you go, darling, Molly said as she screwed the cap back on the jar. And just in time, too, Ginny said as she held out the frozen juice pop. What's this? Molly asked. Muggle remedy, Ginny smiled. Look, Auntie Ginny, you wearing Quidditch, Aurelian commented, just taking note of Ginny's Quidditch uniform. Yes, I am, she chuckled. You play Quidditch? You play Quidditch, Aunt Ginny? He asked. Yep. He continued to take large licks of his frozen treat as he asked, Green and gold, you like a harpies, Ginny. You like harpies? Yes, I do. I play chaser for them, Ginny replied, truly impressed that he recognized the team colors. Jamie like harpies. I like tornadoes, Aurelian stated matter-of-factly. Oh yeah? Who's Jamie? Ginny asked, making polite conversation with the enthusiastic young Quidditch fan. Hermione looked at Ginny in surprise. It took a moment for it to hit her. Harry hadn't told her about James. Jamie, my friend, Aurelian informed her. That's enough Quidditch chit-chat for now, Molly interrupted. He needs to finish his treat and take a nap. We've been quite busy and it's already getting into the afternoon. And you, young lady, need to get out of those filthy Quidditch robes and get yourself a shower. Do I smell that bad? Ginny teased. I didn't say anything about your stench, but if you're asking, you've smelled better, Molly stated. Ginny chuckled and shook her head. Feel better, little man, she ruffled Aurelian's hair before heading upstairs. Hermione was a bit relieved. She didn't want Ginny to find out about James like that. She wondered why Harry hadn't told her. Ugh, Ginny sighed dramatically as she fell backwards onto her bed. She had just gotten out of the shower a few minutes before, and her ginger hair was wet and heavy and caused her pillow to become damp. Rough practice? Hermione asked as she turned Ginny's desk chair toward the bed and sat. Was it ever? She replied. What about you, though? How did it go? No, you first, Hermione insisted. It was exhausting. We're still getting used to the new coach, and she's riding us rather hard. Still, I couldn't imagine a better job. Ginny smiled tiredly. Your turn. It was rough. We learned a lot, but, she sighed, it's just terrible to see it. I don't know what Harry has told you about it. Everything from the first viewing, Ginny answered. He told me about Hogwarts. Yeah, Hermione said despondently. Today was just as bad, if not worse. It was just, I don't know. It's just terrible seeing all the horrible things we experienced. There were so many losses. And I know it's ridiculous, but this whole thing with Malfoy is just as distressing to me. That's not ridiculous, Ginny assured her. It has to be rather uncomfortable. It is. I don't know what to think of him anymore. I can hardly look at him now after everything we've seen. He's always been such an arrogant, bigoted prat. And to see us, it's so confusing. He's not that man at all, Hermione said dejectedly. That man in the pensive. He was so, I don't know. I loved him, Ginny. I've never really been able to imagine being able to love someone like that. To have someone love me like that. I felt such a loss when he died in the memory. But I look at Malfoy now and wonder how on earth I could have ever had feelings like that for him. And now I have to see him every day. It's uncomfortable. And we have a child together. She whimpered and tilted her head back to rest on the top of the chair. Ginny watched her friend and listened to her rant sympathetically. You know, he came to my house last night and asked to see Aurelian, she declared incredulously. Really? Ginny asked, taken by surprise. What did you say? I said no. I don't know him, she said defensively. I'm afraid that if Aurelian is around him, he'll get confused. I don't know Malfoy, but I know he's not the man I saw in the pensive. He's not the person Aurelian knows as Daddy. I don't want him to get hurt. Well, you have to do what you feel is best for him, Ginny agreed. I know, but whoever Malfoy is, he's still Aurelian's father, and he wants to see him, Hermione said miserably. I know it's terrible to say, but you can't base your decision on how Malfoy feels about this, Ginny replied seriously. You have to decide what's best for Aurelian. That's just the thing, though. I don't know what's best. I tell myself that it can't be good to associate with him, but I have doubts, Hermione admitted, truly distressed by the dilemma. Well, what is Malfoy like around him? Ginny turned onto her side to face Hermione and propped her head up with her hand. He was absolutely horrid to him at first, Hermione said with outrage. But now, I don't know. Hermione stood up from her seat and slowly started to pace the length of the room. Aurelian saw him this morning. Harry hadn't told me that Malfoy was coming. Aurelian started talking to him, and Malfoy tolerated him all right. He looked uncomfortable, but not unfriendly. He looked rather interested in Ari, but he was really upset with me still. I don't know, Gin. I really don't know. Well, I really don't know Malfoy like the rest of you do, so I can't really help it all that much. I mean, do you think Malfoy would ever physically hurt him? Ginny asked. No, Hermione answered quickly. I don't feel I know much about him anymore either, but I don't think he'd ever physically hurt him. Well, that's good. At least you don't have to worry about anything like that, Ginny offered positively. What do you think his interest is in him? I don't really know. He was appalled at first to think that Aurelian could be his, but after we watched the first half of the memories, I don't know. Well, you have to consider that Malfoy saw the same things you did. You said that you were really confused by him now. He never liked you either, but he never really had a look at you before. I'm sure it was unsettling for him to see himself so dedicated to you and Aurelian. He was probably rather confused seeing you love him the way you did. You never imagined yourself being loved like that. What if he didn't either? Ginny offered. We're talking about him and Aurelian, not what he thinks of me, Hermione pointedly reminded her. Ginny shrugged. It still makes the same point. A person can hardly imagine what it's really like to have a kid. He saw it. He saw his love and devotion toward Aurelian, and he sees Aurelian's unconditional love for him. Don't you feel different toward him now? You weren't exactly thrilled to find out you were a parent either. You were rather uncomfortable around Aurelian at first, too. Now look at you, racing to his aid when he gets a bump. We're not talking about me, remember? Hermione said again. This is Malfoy we're talking about. Do you really think he'd do that? From what you've told me about the man and the pensive, then you've already seen that he's capable of it, Ginny answered. She sat up in the bed and looked at her friend seriously. Now, Hermione, I'm not trying to push you in any direction. I already told you, I don't know Malfoy. I don't know how he's taking this. You know much better than I do. I'm just speculating over here. I know. Hermione felt more confused and flustered than ever. Ginny, promise you won't think badly of me. You know I won't, Ginny reassured her, her concern apparent. I'm worried that I'm mixing my personal feelings into the decision, Hermione confessed. I'm afraid I don't feel comfortable around Malfoy. Well, it's understandable, Ginny assured her. No matter what you choose, it will be okay. Aurelian is going to be confused no matter what you choose, so he's also a pretty tough kid. He'll be okay. Hermione nodded. Thank you. Phew, Hermione breathed as she stepped out of her fireplace and set Aurelian down. It's been quite a long day, hasn't it? Aurelian simply smiled up at her. Time to go get your pajamas on, I think, she told him. No bed, Aurelian whined. I know you don't like going to bed, Hermione told him as she took his small hand in hers. But it's been a crazy day, and it's time to get some sleep. Here, you can choose your pajamas tonight. Stripes or shooting stars? Stripes, Aurelian decided without hesitation. Hermione tossed the other set of pajamas back into the dresser drawer that she had designated as his. Aurelian had already climbed up onto her bed and was trying to remove his still-buttoned robes again. Hold on, hold still, Hermione chuckled as she pulled the robes down far enough to unfasten them. Found you! Aurelian shouted and laughed when the robes were pulled over his head. Yes, you did. And I found you, too, Hermione smiled. Aurelian held onto her shoulders as he stepped into his pajama bottoms. So, did you have fun playing with Teddy tonight? She asked uncertainly. She had been rather concerned when Harry brought Teddy with him to dinner at the Weasleys, because Aurelian had known him to be 7 years old. But Aurelian seemed to get along with him okay. He was rather confused, of course, but when Hermione explained that Teddy was now going to be Aurelian's size, he was rather excited. Teddy, my friend, Aurelian smiled. I play with him more. I think we can arrange that soon, Hermione agreed as she tugged her pajama shirt over Aurelian's head. Found you, he squealed again, quite amused by the ongoing game he'd created. Jamie play too? He asked, plopping down on his bottom when Hermione turned down the blankets. Hermione continued to hold a smile even though her insides twisted uncomfortably. She knew the topic would come up before too long, but she still didn't know what to tell him. Jamie's not here anymore, love, she told him gently. He laid his head back on the pillow and looked up at her in confusion. Hermione tenderly ran her fingers through his soft, light brown locks in what she hoped was a soothing manner. Jamie went away. We're not going to be able to play with him anymore. Why? Sometimes things just change. A lot of things have changed. Lots of things are happier now, but some things might be a little sad, she tried to explain. I like Poi Teddy, Aurelian responded. Hermione gave him a small, sad smile. The poor little boy didn't understand. It was sad in Hermione's eyes, but she thought it was probably better that he didn't. Eventually, he would probably forget about playing with James and look forward to playing with Teddy. So, I was thinking, she told him as she laid down beside him in the bed, still fully dressed. We should probably start thinking of getting a bed for you, don't you think? Bed for me? Yeah, what do you think? I'd have to extend the room, but you could have your own bed. Not big one. I whittle for a whittle one, the toddler told her seriously. Yes, you are little. You don't need a big bed like this. We'll get a perfect Aurelian-sized one. What do you say? I get a bed and we no more camping? He said. I no want camping no more. Hermione felt another twinge inside. This poor little boy had been through so much. No, no more camping. This is our home now, okay? I miss Perny and Daddy, the boy told her with a sad, tired look in his eyes. He was quickly drifting toward sleep as Hermione stroked his hair. Perny and Daddy come here too? Just get some sleep, love. We'll talk some more in the morning. She slowly pulled her hand back and gave him a gentle kiss on the forehead. Good night, Aurelian.